Today, we're going to deep dive into some sophomore wide receivers. So we're going to take a look at all the guys up top. We have a great class that were rookies last year, all the way down to some of the names that might not be relevant to start the year, but that you want to keep on your radar for early in the year if they do start to do new and improved things this season. Matt, how's it going?
I'm doing good, my friend.
So we'll start up top, and I think it's a pretty easy thing to say that this S tier is going to be very important for fantasy this year. And the first guy is Malik Nabers, right? I mean, had 170 targets in 15 games last year. It's really hard to compete with somebody in fantasy that gets that kind of volume. If his quarterback play is even at all better with Russell Wilson or maybe eventually Jackson Dart, the wheels could go all the way up for him this year, and he could finish as wide receiver one. So I love Malik Nabers this year. And he takes the cake right now for me. Him and BTJ are really close for me.
Yeah.
But I do have Malik one spot ahead.
It was like a 35% target share, and they didn't really do anything else in the wide receiver room either. So I think it's just going to be more of the same. And, although Russ might not air it out quite as much, the ragtag group of guys that he was working with Daniel Jones, Drew Lock, Tommy DeVito, and Tim Boyle was just an embarrassment.
Yeah, not Russell Wilson, right? Like that's way better than whatever he was working with.
And there is always the chance that he gets a few games with Jameis Winston. You never know. And then we will be ranking him number one that week.
Yeah.
All right. So next up, Brian Thomas Jr. He was coming off obviously an incredible season, wide receiver 4 on 87 catches and playing half his game with Mac Jones. In terms of targets, he was quite a bit lower than Malik Nabers. He only saw 133. And interestingly, he was single digit targets every week until after their week 12 bye. And then he was double digits in every game after that. And the nice thing too was they got him involved more in the short and intermediate layup routes, which I think was a big thing for him. And now they bring in Liam Cohen. We saw how he orchestrated the Bucs offense. And of course they bring in Travis Hunter. I've talked about this before, but the team has over 200 vacated targets, which is 4th most in the NFL. Should be a very heavily concentrated offense. And, looking back to last offseason, we talked about BTJ a ton, and he was described as unguardable and all these things, and he really exceeded our expectations. But one of the things as well, and I know we've gone back and forth on this too, is just how much of a touchdown just machine BTJ is. Like 10 last year, 17 his final season at LSU, sharing the field with Malik Nabers, 5 the year before on only 31 catches. And more importantly, like the Jags only threw 19 touchdowns last year, whereas Baker threw 41. So while we're not expecting that, there's definitely some room for growth in that department for this team.
Yeah, and that's kind of scary to think about, right? That he could increase his touchdowns. Yeah. There's been a lot of regression around the touchdowns. So I'm glad you highlighted that with BTJ, because I feel like as much room as there is for regression, I feel like not enough people are talking about the wide receiver 1 overall outcome if it is 13 or 14 touchdowns this year. So anyways, I'm excited about BTJ. He's like my favorite player in Superflex 10 team leagues to pick in the second round. It just feels like such a value there for somebody that has such immense upside. Last guy in this tier is Lad McConkey, your favorite and mine. So this maybe is a little bit of a subset tier because we do have him at 10 and we have these other guys up at 6 and 7. But Lad, I think, is every bit as good with as much upside as these guys. I will say Lad's stats were not even that different from Malik Nabers last year, but Nabers did it on 170 targets and Lad did it on 112. So if there is going to be more volume for Lad, he had 1,150 yards, he had 7 touchdowns. Like if there's going to be more volume and he's going to push 140 targets, 150 targets, this might be something where he even ascends further than we're even thinking at this point.
Yeah, and everything about Lad's like underlying metrics, success rate on his route tree, like everything was just like all wheels are pointed up. Like I know we're biased as Chargers fans, but I just think he's going to be a superstar. He forced 15 missed tackles last year. He's obviously not a big guy. He was great in contested catches. Like there's just nothing wrong with his game.
All right, that's it for the S tier. Obviously these guys are top 10 receivers. So moving on down now, the next guy we're going to talk about is Marvin Harrison Jr. So I'm a little lower on him than you, but I do think in terms of just looking at him individually, right? He did have a very productive rookie season. it wasn't maybe as good as the other guys, so it kind of pales in comparison. But in terms of historically, it was very, very good, very productive. And I do think that he can ascend more if he's used more properly. And I think you share that sentiment because I just have a feeling that they have to get him more involved in different parts of his route tree.
It's funny you say that about like the historic numbers, because his rookie numbers were very similar to his dad's and to Larry Fitzgerald's. And I will say, I think it was Trey McBride that said that they were adding like more motion and wrinkles and sauce to this offense too. And, last year they were like 30th in motion rate, and he had 1 target off of pre-snap motion. So I think that just has to change. And again, it's really just him and Trey McBride too. So hopefully they get on the same page and he can live up to that, number 1 wide receiver consensus wise in a historic class.
There's just a lot of hope. Right, he put on a lot of muscle. He's looking to make the jump. I think he's feeling the pressure and he's feeling the heat a little bit, and he's using it as motivation, which is good. Instead of turning it into, what was me? It's more like I got to grind, I got to get better, right? That type of stuff. So I think good things could be on the horizon for Marv. I just am a little bit weary of picking him in redraft. In Dynasty, I think he's still well worth a high pick, and this year, I hope he gets off to a hot start, because if he doesn't, I could just see him plummeting down rankings. Next guy up that we're going to talk about is Xavier Worthy. So this is somebody that I think I like a little bit better than you, but overall, I do think he took a major step forward over the second half of last year and in the playoffs. And I do know Rashee Rice will be back in the offense. So the number of targets he's going to get isn't going to be as crazy as it was down the stretch last year. But I do think on 7-8 targets with a different receiver kind of opening up the field for him, not garnering so much attention for him, I do think that there's an opportunity here for him to be very productive down the field. And he's tied to Patrick Mahomes, which I think is a huge positive. I know Mahomes hasn't been so great for fantasy the last couple of years, but I do think that this could change with Rashee Rice and Xavier Worthy healthy at the same time.
Yeah, they've been talking about in camp so far. They've really been working on kind of getting the deep ball back. And, I'm buying the dip on Mahomes. I do say with Worthy, like the stars did kind of align last year with Hollywood gone, Rashee gone, Kelsey taking a step back.
Right. And that's it for that tier now too. These guys right around wide receiver 20. So, we're going to tier break it there, go down to wide receiver 30 in redraft. 35 maybe, and we're going to start with Rome Odunze. So I just wish the offense wasn't quite so crowded for his sake. Obviously I was getting more and more excited. I was starting to push him inside my top 30 until the draft, and then they draft Loveland, they draft Burden, and it's just like, oh man, like that's not ideal for him taking a step forward in terms of volume. Now it still could happen. And if he does take over as the number 1, like I was kind of hoping he could do from DJ Moore, where he's more the X, the featured piece. DJ Moore operates closer to the line of scrimmage, in more of the Amon-Ra role maybe, and then the Jameson Williams role goes to Odunze. But I don't know so much anymore. I just feel like maybe the target share isn't going to be there. And if he is down in the 20% target share range, he's just not going to have very many weeks where he booms. So unfortunately, I'm just a little bit lower on him because of volume. But I do still think the player is really talented. He was obviously a top 10 pick just last year, and new offensive coordinator. New coaching staff, really, right? But Ben Johnson there to help make the offense much better. So I do still have quite a bit of hope for Odunze, somebody I am targeting later in my drafts.
I took him in our startup draft, which was before the NFL draft, and seeing Loveland and Burden get picked, I was biting my fingernails a little bit. But I will say with Rome, like a lot of the underlying metrics were really good last year. We know he's very talented. The situation was just kind of a mess. So, it'll be interesting to see how that all shakes out. But overall, the offense will be much better this year.
Next up is Ricky Pearsall.
Yeah, so Ricky, I think, is going to be a very popular breakout pick this year, and for good reason, right? Like he finished the season strong. We all know what happened in the offseason. Like the fact that he was able to get up to speed without camp, in this complicated offensive system and really show out at the end of the year was really impressive. And we know he's a great route runner. We know he's on an elite offense. We know that a lot of these Niners wide receivers right now are pushed down heavily. And this is a team that we would expect to score a bunch of points. And Debo's gone. Ayuk is likely going to start on the pup. So this is a player I have really a lot of hope for this season, and I've been targeting quite a bit.
Yeah, and he's going to be pretty polarizing, I think, this year. Like, I've been seeing, like, a certain sites push him up quite a bit, like into 12 team leagues, like into the 7th round or 8th round, like borderline drafting him as a starter. You know, and I think that we need a lot more news to come out about his role in the offense, because even without Ayuk, I'm concerned he's 4th in line in terms of targets. But if it is going to be first, because I think there is that, you know, that range of outcomes for him. Yeah. You know, I do think if we're getting news that he is going to increase, I think we can even possibly move him up, because he was a 1st round pick last year in all the talent in the world, like you mentioned. So interested on Ricky Pearsall. Call me tentative there. All right. Next guy up, we're moving down another tier now. So those guys are the ones that are getting drafted in the single digit rounds, maybe 10, 11 in your 10 team leagues, especially in Superflex. These guys now from here down are probably going to be more dart throws. So the first guy we're going to talk about here is Keon Coleman. So he's been actually getting a lot of rave reviews that he's been difficult to cover, and that, you know, he's put on weight. He looks a lot faster in camp. Again, I don't know. He's like made it his mission to be the number 1 wide receiver on the team. So if all that stuff does come to fruition, he's going to be super valuable. So, you know, Amari Cooper, they brought in to try and have like a true 1, and maybe that did help him grow as a rookie. And then over this offseason, he's been putting in work, I guess. So, you know, I do like Coleman, and, you know, you obviously loved Coleman last year. So what do you think about the player here?
Yeah. And, you know, what I said last year with Coleman, you know, obviously love his talent, loved him at Florida State. And I was very adamant that the only way that I thought it wasn't going to work was if they just stick him at X and say, go win on the outside. And that's like exactly what they did. Like 80% of his snaps were on the line, 89% outside. And it's hilarious how like all analysts and scouts just think that that's not the position that he should be in. But the issue is, like, this is a very crowded receiving room. Like, Shakir's probably going to be the top dog in terms of targets. They add Josh Palmer, they add Elijah Moore, Kincaid gets a decent amount of targets. But, you know, the silver lining was last year he had a couple nice games before getting injured, and he wasn't the same when he came back at the end of the season. I just think for him, it's more of like I don't want to say like a best ball dart throw, because I do think he has spike week potential, because he is pretty decent in yards after catch, although he's not like the fastest 40 time guy. His game speed's a little bit higher. But for me with the Bills, I'm kind of just like taking Josh Allen and James Cook this year and just letting the rest of them play out.
Next guy up is Xavier Legette. So again, this is probably a guy that you like more than me. I'm a little concerned that he's going to get schemed out of the offense, because they bring in Ted McMillan. Jalen Coker is somebody that they love there. Adam Thielen, he's, you know, in the twilight of his career, but he was still productive last year. And then they have Jatavian Sanders at tight end, who's going into his 2nd year. So this is not somebody I'm super excited to draft. And he was a 1st round pick, and he should be better than he was. But, you know, I don't really understand what his role is going to be. And so for me, this is somebody that I struggle with. You know, it's a 1st round pick, so you got to kind of stick with him or hang with him, but not somebody I'm looking to pick.
Can I try to sell you on Legette a little bit?
Sure, do it. I went negative because I knew you were going to go positive.
Okay, because you know I love Legette as well. And you know I have a sucker for these like SEC tier 2 schools, guys that just produce these insane athletes. But obviously last year, like wide receiver 65 was a disappointment, and he wasn't on the field much his first few weeks. Then Adam Thielen misses week 4, and Legette has kind of a breakout game against the Bengals. He's like the hot waiver wire target. He was used around the formation, lined up off the line of scrimmage, et cetera, et cetera. Then fast forward to the following week, he's knocked out of the game with a shoulder injury. Then fast forward a couple other weeks, Deontay Johnson gets traded, forcing Legette to play the X, which wasn't what he profiled out coming into the league, and it didn't really work out. So now you bring in Ted McMillan, who's going to play this boundary outside receiver, pushes Legette It's a flanker to slot, can move around, uses athleticism, get him on quick crossers, get the ball in his hands. I just think that's going to be kind of a blessing in disguise. Now, like what you said in terms of like Thielen, he's probably going to start as the slot. He's 35. Is he going to play a full year? Coker can fill in nicely here. So I think just overall, I'm optimistic just that he can develop, and the fact that Dave Canales, has spent time as a receivers coach in the past too. So maybe that's just, blind love for this player. But I think a couple things broke the wrong way. And when you're a rookie, things can get away from you a little bit quickly. So I have hope. Again, not a heavy target, but just as a dart throw, I like to take shots on guys like this.
Yeah. And, I think I hear you on the talent, on the, on how he was used last year, all that stuff, and how he had to step in. This year, I just don't know if he's going to play. Like, I literally think he might be wide receiver 4 on their team. And
that's fair.
With that, I'm not a huge fan of, going out and trying to pick him when I don't really see the upside case without injury. So that's where I'm at with him. All right. Next guy up in the next tier now is Jalen McMillan. And I think we were all getting pretty excited about Jalen McMillan. I know the dynasty community was going crazy for him. They were pushing him up into, like, on Keep Trade Cut, he was up in wide receiver 25 range. And then they drafted Emeka Egbuka, and he just craters. So, again, I think it's going to take an injury for him to kind of get back into consistent playing time. But I do like the talent of the player. I think he was very good. Last year, he showed down the stretch that he could score touchdowns too, because he scored 7 touchdowns in his last 6 games. So, I think if he does get more of the slot role, I think more of the X role when he was trying to fill in for Evans, who got hurt at the beginning of the year, he didn't do so well there. But when he was filling in for Godwin's role, he did produce at a really high level. So I think that's, a little bit more of where he can be used effectively. Now, we'll see what his role is at the beginning of the year. Another guy that maybe you track on the waiver wire, he's a good player. And if anything does happen, he's going to be the hottest ad in the league.
Yeah, I agree with that second part mostly. And it'll be interesting. We talked about this with Godwin in the full wide receiver rankings episode, where it's like, what role does he go back into the slot role? Does he push back outside that he was a couple years ago because they bring in Egbuka? And like, McMillan can play around the formation. Like, he was mostly slot at Washington and did play quite a bit outside last year.
Next guy up is guy we just were talking about with Legette a little bit, is Jalen.
Yeah, clearly your favorite player, so go ahead.
Yeah, well, on Coker, I just think they really like him in the building. He was productive last year as a rookie, and so I think there's a pretty clear role for him, right? Tet McMillan, he's not a burner, but he is going to be more of an alpha type of wide receiver, big body for Young to throw to kind of all over the field. And then they can put Coker on the other side of the field. And I think there's a role to be had for boom weeks or for, last wide receiver on your bench type of thing. And then any injuries that do happen, he can even see more targets. So I just think, I know he was undrafted, so it's a little bit sketchy to go in on somebody like that. But in redraft, I think, he has the role right now. He's going to be playing outside down the field. And if the offense does take a step forward and there's not very much attention on him, I think there could be weeks where he scores a couple touchdowns and you're going to wish you had him in your lineup in those weeks.
Yeah, we know Coker has a cult-like following, and apparently you're one of those guys. So we can agree to disagree on that one. But
yeah, it's not me so much as it is the coach.
No, I think he's good. I think he was he was an awesome story, like undrafted free agent. Like that's awesome. He had some really good games. Like he did great. Like, I'm not knocking him whatsoever. I just have a hard time believing that's going to be the game plan versus the wide receiver in round 1 in Legette.
Yeah, which that's a pretty stark contrast, right? You use your first round pick on a receiver and then you have an undrafted receiver. We'll see who ends up getting the playing time. But I think if it is Legette, I'll probably be very wrong on Coker. I just think that Coker's role is different. We talked about this kind of similar thing with Kayshon Boutte, where with the Patriots, right, he might not be the better receiver, the best receiver, but he's the best fit for the downfield role. And so he gets to stay on the field, even if Stephon Diggs kind of takes over Demario Douglas's role, for example. So I think it's maybe a little bit of a similar thing there where Legette isn't as good at what Coker does. So I don't know. We'll see. I just really like Coker. I think he's worth a pick, even more so than Legette, in my opinion, because I just don't know if with McMillan being there, if Legette is going to be in position to get any sort of volume. All right, next guy is Devaughn Vele.
Yeah, I mean, Devaughn Vele, like, whatever. I don't know. Like, they added Pat Bryant. They added Evan Ingram. Like, Mims had a strong finish to the season. Like, I think this is just all going to lead to a target crunch. But, like, he did have a few solid games last season. But, you know, as much as I'm not a huge, like, Pat Bryant guy, but I don't know, Sean Payton seems to think he's going to take over that.
Michael Thomas,
yeah,
Marcus Colston.
Yeah, he's going to take over that role. So I don't know. Again, this is kind of the range where for me, like, I like to take shots on guys that I think have traits that could help them rise versus like guys that have had carved out like decent roles. So for example, Legette and then like Adonai Mitchell, who we'll talk to, is just kind of how I prefer to build my teams. Not that that's necessarily always worked out.
Yeah, and Vele has been getting rave reports in camp like that. You know, he's been Bo Nix's favorite receiver target. Now, whatever, I don't buy that. So don't either. Like, there's a lot of coach speak. There's a lot of news that comes out of OTAs, that type of thing. Don't be buying that, because Vele is another guy who might not get on the field very much, right? If he doesn't beat out Troy Franklin, who he's competing with, who we'll get into next, versus Pat Bryant or Cortland Sutton, like, just take all of that with a grain of salt when the role isn't clear for him. So anyways, I like Vele, but yeah, again, not somebody I'll probably have on my radar outside of deep league dart throw. And then last guy you mentioned in this tier, great segue into Adonai Mitchell. So the offense is crowded in Indianapolis, right? The Colts have weapons everywhere, and they add Tyler Warren to the fold, and they have a quarterback that's likely going to win the job that can't complete any of his passes. So, you know, it's just like brutal combination here for Adonai Mitchell. But I don't know if any of you watching have seen any of the like compilations of like the best 35-500 season that you've ever seen from a rookie. And then it'll just show him just absolutely route somebody up and the ball's 10 yards over his head.
Yeah.
So, you know, I mean, it's just unfortunate, right? Because I loved the player.
He's so talented.
He's so good. I thought that the Bills should have taken him. The Bills got multiple chances to trade down. They picked Keon Coleman over him. I know you had Keon Coleman ahead of Adonai Mitchell, but I was I just wished so badly that they took Mitchell. And then after the Bills, right, that nobody really needed. Well, I guess, you know, the Chargers took Ladd McConkey, and we were both all about Ladd McConkey. I mean, that was a whiff on so many teams to not take him. But after that, right, I mean, the Patriots passed on him for Jalen Polk, who we'll talk about, and then like he got passed over again. And so I don't know. I just wish if he was on New England right now, I would just be ecstatic about picking him. I would move him up into the B tier. I would just be all over him. But unfortunately, his situation is just so.
And this is a guy that was receiving comps kind of everywhere to CeeDee Lamb coming in. So again, this is the type of player that I like to target. You know, maybe somebody gets traded on that team because they've got so many guys everywhere, but definitely someone that's more of a guy that I'm in on in Dynasty, though.
Yeah, and I bet that the Colts are regretting paying Michael Pittman right about now. I feel like he could fill that role in the offense. They could have Downs that's more of the slot, operate close to the line, and Tyler Warren that's obviously down the seam in the middle of the field as well. So unfortunate, but I just don't see a role for him that's going to be very productive this year. Hopefully I'm wrong on that. All right, now we're going to move down to the F tier, and we mentioned Jalen Polk got drafted over Adonai Mitchell, but Polk was completely disappointing last year. I mean, he was awful. I know you drafted him almost everywhere because you saw a path to him possibly being the number one there, and he let you down big time. I mean, the fact that they were willing to trade down from Ladd McConkey and then pick Polk is just wild to me. What a whiff on the scouting department's
And that one wasn't really even close either. I mean, it's not.
No, it wasn't.
It
wasn't. And the scouts were in there saying, "Oh, Polk and Ladd, they're the same player. They're the same player. Let's accumulate picks and move down and get him." And it's like, okay, that's like just like I keep saying, I don't even have words for it. I can't even express how dumb that was. But anyways, I just don't think Polk is valuable at all. I don't think he's worth owning. I don't think he's going to be on the field much. He couldn't get on the field much last year. So I kind of think his career is mostly over.
Yeah. And it was weird because like he was getting great reports in camp. He was being referred to as like a faster Jacoby Myers. Like in college, he had sure hands and was an excellent blocker. And then all of a sudden he's like awful at both. Like he clearly lost confidence. Like the drops kept compounding, and it was about as bad as it gets. I would say like that's not some way that I'm like touching it all this year, but like maybe with the new regime, like he can regain some sort of confidence.
Next guy up is Malik Washington. So there was a lot less expectations on Malik Washington. He was a day 3 pick. But he showed out a little bit at the end of the year last year. He's decent close to the line of scrimmage, and that's kind of where the offense turned for the Dolphins last year. I would have liked him more, obviously, if Tyreek had moved on and they didn't really replace him in the wide receiver room. But overall, I think, decently talented player. I think if one of them gets hurt, either Waddle or Tyreek, that he'll be a waiver claim. Now, whether or not he sticks in your team, or whether or not he's super productive or anything like that, I think it remains to be seen. He might almost benefit more from like a Jonnu injury, and he can slide into that role. But overall, not super excited here, but I do think there could be some value. I do have him on a dynasty team, so I am kind of hopeful that he can turn into more.
Yeah, and he's a nice player, but when we're talking about Waddle being like the number 4 target earner on the team last year, like there's just not a whole lot of room to operate.
Next guy up is Troy Franklin. So you were high on him last year. What do you got on Franklin going into this year?
Yeah, so I would say similar to Vele, where it's a limited opportunity share, but at least Franklin does have the big play ability. We have seen a few in those, but it was weird. Like it just seemed like he and Nix seemed to have zero chemistry last year, which is kind of perplexing considering they were teammates at Oregon. And this was also a guy that, like, I don't know if you remember going into last year's draft, NFL draft, like he was being mocked like sometimes in the late first round. And I know he fell quite a bit, but again, this is the type of player where it's like he could just not see the field this year, right? Like if Mims gets more opportunity share, Franklin doesn't take a step forward.
Yeah, if Vele beats him out, then there's just there's not a spot for
tough.
him. Yeah, and that's, like you said, not even including Mims, right? Who is more of just the downfield player. So yeah, I don't know. It's definitely interesting on Franklin. I as much as I want to draft him and like him, I just kind of don't. So I'll probably be taking Vele over him. All right, the next guy up is Jordan Whittington. He showed out a little bit last year in limited opportunities, right? I mean, obviously, both wide receivers got hurt early in the year, and he was kind of thrust into this role as a day 3 pick where Stafford was leaning on him. Now, obviously, Stafford's fantasy value tanked when Puka and Cobb were both out, but Whittington had a couple games where it was, 10 targets and was actually able to move the ball and be the number 1 on the offense. So I felt obligated to put him on here because if there is an injury to this receiving core again, I think that there's definitely something to be said here that he could step in as the number 2. And overall, I think the player's pretty good despite being a 7th round pick. So they obviously hit on Puka in the 5th. So I think they might have hit a little bit on this guy in the 7th round too. And, I think the fact that they didn't bring in a 3rd option, they didn't really draft another wide receiver. So I think they still look at him as somebody that they can rely on if they need him.
Yeah, this is just one of those guys, especially I think if Puka goes down, like he will be a very big, fab waiver guy that week.
Yeah, I think so too. And then the last guy that we're going to talk about here is Roman Wilson.
Yeah, so, we'll see. The opportunity share could absolutely be there because all they really have is DK Metcalf, and Roman Wilson dealt with injuries last year. He didn't get on the field, but he was a 3rd round pick. He was a nice player at Michigan, kind of more of a possession guy, but like I said, if he walks into being potential number 2 for Aaron Rodgers, there's some value in that. Now, I still think that Romeo Doubs gets traded there, but again, maybe somebody you want to target late if it's looking like that in camp, but
yeah, and if Dobbs goes there, obviously we'll like Dobbs a lot more. We didn't even put him on any of our ranking stuff yet. But, I am with you on this. I'm not a huge Roman Wilson fan. We'll see if there's any connection there with Rodgers, but we know Rodgers likes to lock on to one receiver. And, they do have Warren out of the backfield. They have Freiermuth at tight end. I feel like the offense is going to be pretty concentrated in those 3 players in the passing game. So, I don't think necessarily that they need to have a big time other receiver, and maybe Calvin Austin is the guy down the field for them. But overall, I don't think we're.
And he doesn't have a ton of juice to his game either, right? Like, it's not like he's going to go out there and just be electric. I guess his potential upside of getting on the field is like, because he was a Harbaugh guy at Michigan, like, he's been coached well. He's going to fit in with kind of that Steelers culture too. But again, this is kind of like a 6 for 55 guy. And you're like, okay, whatever.
Yeah, exactly. All right. And with that, thank you guys so much for watching. These are our sophomore wide receiver rankings, broken down by tier. I'm kind of just going through where they're going to be drafted and redraft. And, there's a lot of really exciting players on here, really. Like, this is kind of reshaped the wide receiver room, the wide receiver rankings. We've talked about how much better the end of the 2nd round, beginning of the 3rd round feels this year than it did last year. And it's because a lot of the players that you see here up at the top. So, very excited to get into more mock drafts and continue to talk about these guys throughout the offseason.